In the 20th century, a French philosopher asked a quiet but surprising question. What if the world does not begin in our thoughts, but in the way we see, move, and feel? Maurice Merleau-Ponty believed that perception comes first. Our lived body, our gestures, even the simple act of reaching for something already reveal a deeper connection with the world. He explored how movement carries intention, how space has depth, how language grows from expression, and how the visible always hides something more. For him, we are not outside the world looking in. We are inside it from the beginning, and every perception opens a small mystery waiting to be understood. Close your eyes and touch the surface beside you. Before any thought forms, before any concept emerges, you already know whether it feels smooth or rough, warm or cold, solid or yielding. This immediate knowing is not inference. You did not receive disconnected sensations. Then mentally construct an interpretation. The texture revealed itself directly through your living contact with it. Perception came first. Philosophy spent centuries getting this backwards. Descartes claimed we are thinking things primarily, minds that happen to be attached to bodies. The empiricists argued we construct reality from atomic sense impressions, building objects from mental bricks. Intellectualism insisted that perception requires judgment, that seeing involves interpreting raw data through concepts. All these traditions shared one assumption: thought precedes and grounds perceptual experience. Merleau-Ponty recognized this as catastrophic error. We encounter the world through our bodies before any intellectual activity begins. A child grasps a toy without first calculating distances or conceptualizing object permanence. An athlete catches a ball by inhabiting the trajectory bodily, not by solving equations of motion. Even scientists performing experiments depend on perceptual engagement with instruments, readings, phenomena. Intellectual knowledge does not create perceptual contact, but rather emerges from it, refines it, systematizes what was already given in lived experience. This reverses the entire Cartesian edifice. Consciousness is not a transparent thinking substance accidentally housed in physical mechanisms. Rather, consciousness is incarnate from the start, inseparable from the body that situates it in the world. Perception is not a mental operation that happens to involve sensory organs. Perception is the body's way of being present to things, of inhabiting space, of making sense through corporeal engagement. Before I think, therefore I am, comes I perceive, therefore I exist. The implications explode across philosophy. Epistemology can no longer start from isolated minds wondering whether external reality exists. We are already immersed in the world through perceptual openness. Psychology cannot reduce experience to neural mechanisms or mental representations. Experience is the lived body encountering meaningful situations. Metaphysics must abandon the split between thinking substance and extended substance, recognizing instead the primordial unity of embodied existence. Yet what exactly is this body that perceives? Not the anatomical object studied by medicine, but something stranger and more intimate. You are not inside your body. The notion collapses under scrutiny. Where would this inside be? Behind the eyes, watching sensory input on some mental screen? That picture generates endless paradoxes. Who watches the watcher? How does internal consciousness access external reality? The image of a ghost in a machine haunted philosophy for centuries, precisely because it makes consciousness and world forever separate. Consider instead how you actually exist. Right now, while reading, you do not experience yourself as a mind receiving visual data from ocular instruments. You see the text directly, your eyes already oriented toward meaning, your body already engaged in the activity of reading. When you reach for a cup, you do not issue mental commands to mechanical appendages. Your hand is already at the cup, your grasp already shaped to its form. The body does not mediate between consciousness and world. The body is consciousness taking root in the world. This lived body differs fundamentally from the objective body studied by anatomy and physiology. Science treats the body as object among objects, a complex mechanism subject to physical laws. Valid for certain purposes, this third-person view misses the body as I live it from within. My body is not primarily a thing I observe, but the perspective from which I observe everything else. It is the absolute here, from which all spatial relations radiate, the constant now through which all temporal experience flows. Furthermore, saying I have a body distorts the relationship. Possession implies external connection between owner and owned. Yet I cannot step outside my body to examine our relationship. I am my body in a sense more intimate than any having. My body is not an instrument I use, but the way I exist, the form my being takes, the manner in which I am present to the world and to myself. Mind-body dualism dissolves when we recognize that embodiment is primordial, not two substances mysteriously connected, but one way of being. Traditional philosophy missed this because it adopted the theoretical stance, observing the body from outside rather than inhabiting it from within. Nevertheless, even theoretical observation depends on bodily engagement. The scientist examining neural tissue does so through living eyes, manipulating instruments with practiced hands, situated in space through postural awareness. The body that anatomizes bodies is not itself anatomical but lived. Understanding this lived body requires examining how it organizes space without explicit calculation or conscious mapping. How do you know where your hand is right now without looking? The question seems trivial until you recognize its strangeness. You possess immediate awareness of your bodily configuration, a sense of which parts occupy which positions, how they can move, what actions they enable. This is not knowledge acquired through observation or remembered from past perceptions. Rather, it operates pre-reflectively as the very condition for any bodily action at all. The body schema names this implicit understanding, not a mental image or explicit representation, but a lived sense of corporeal possibilities. When you walk through a narrow doorway, you do not measure your width against the opening. Your body already knows whether it will fit, adjusting posture and orientation automatically. When you type on a keyboard, you do not consciously locate each key. Your fingers already inhabit the layout, moving toward letters before explicit thought. The body understands space through its own capacities, rather than through geometric calculation. Evidence comes from pathology. Merleau-Ponty studied brain-damaged patients, particularly one named Schneider, whose injuries revealed the deep connection between body and meaning. Schneider could perform concrete movements perfectly. If a mosquito landed on his arm, he would swat it instantly, yet he could not perform abstract movements on command. Asked to point at his nose, he fumbled helplessly. The concrete situation gave his body direct access to meaningful action, while abstract tasks requiring detached spatial understanding proved impossible. This demonstrates something profound. Bodily understanding is not mental knowledge applied to physical mechanisms. The body itself grasps situations, responds to demands, inhabits possibilities. A blind man using a cane does not interpret tactile sensations at his palm, inferring the ground's texture and distance. Rather, the cane becomes extension of his tactile sense, transparent equipment through which he touches the world directly. His body schema expands to include the instrument, making it vanish into its function, just as your own hands vanish into their skilled activities. Traditional theories assumed perception required constructing representations from sensory input, then using those representations to guide bodily responses. Experience proves otherwise. The body reaches toward the world before any representation forms, grasps meanings directly through engagement, acts intelligently without requiring mental mediation. This bodily intelligence, this pre-reflective understanding that makes skilled activity possible, reveals a form of intentionality that philosophy had overlooked. Watch a soccer player receive a pass while defenders converge. The ball arrives at pace, the goal stands distant, opponents close rapidly. Within a fraction of a second, the player controls the ball, identifies space, executes the perfect touch. No time for calculation, no opportunity for explicit reasoning. yet the action succeeds with elegant precision. How? Traditional philosophy assumed intentionality meant mental directedness. Consciousness aims at objects through thoughts, beliefs, desires. The mind intends the world through representational content. Merleau-Ponty discovered this captures only part of the picture. Before mental intentionality, before conceptual thought, the body itself reaches toward the world through what he called motor intentionality. Not consciousness aimed at objects, but the body already oriented toward possibilities for action. This transforms how we understand skill. When you type rapidly, your fingers do not follow mental commands mapping letters to locations. Rather, your hands already inhabit the keyboard space, moving directly toward intended words. The typist's body has absorbed the layout so thoroughly that thinking about it would actually slow performance. Skilled action bypasses representation entirely, flowing from direct bodily grasp of situations. The soccer player does not perceive the ball, then decide on action, then execute movement. Perception and action form one continuous arc of motor intentionality. Consider what this reveals. Grasping is already a form of understanding. Not metaphorically, but literally. When your hand shapes itself to an object before contact, it has already comprehended that object's graspability. The body understands through doing, knows through engaging, grasps meanings directly through its projects and capacities. This bodily intelligence operates beneath conceptual thought, yet structures all our conscious understanding. Language itself emerges from this motor ground. Speaking is gestural action before it becomes symbolic communication, yet recognizing motor intentionality creates a puzzle. If bodily action embodies understanding, if our corporeality grasps meanings directly, how do we classify this existence? We are clearly not pure consciousness floating free from material constraints. Nevertheless, we are not mere mechanisms responding to stimuli through programmed reflexes. Human existence occupies neither traditional category cleanly. Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing sides, but in accepting something philosophy had long tried to eliminate. Philosophy has always sought clarity. Define your terms precisely. Eliminate contradictions. Choose between alternatives. Are humans free or determined? Is consciousness mental or physical? Does truth reside in mind or world? The demand for definitive answers drives the entire Western tradition. What if this demand itself distorts human reality? Merleau-Ponty insisted that ambiguity is not confusion to be overcome, but the fundamental condition of embodied existence. We are neither pure consciousness nor pure mechanism. Consciousness requires a body, yet consciousness cannot be reduced to bodily mechanisms. We are not free-floating minds, yet our existence exceeds mechanical determination. Both aspects operate simultaneously without resolving into either pole. Consider freedom and determinism. Your body arrived with genetic inheritance, grew within specific environments, developed through cultural formation. Biological and social forces shaped you before you could choose anything. Yet you are not simply their product. Within these constraints, you create meaning, project possibilities, take stands on your existence. You are situated freedom, conditioned yet not determined, influenced by facticity yet transcending it through projection. The ambiguity cannot be eliminated without falsifying one dimension or the other. Similarly with perception. You do not create the world through mental activity, yet the world appears only through your embodied engagement with it. Colors are not purely subjective, yet they require eyes to see. Objects have real properties, yet those properties show themselves only to sensing bodies situated in space. The perceived world is neither purely objective nor purely subjective, but emerges from the dialogue between flesh and world. Trying to place perception definitively on one side destroys the phenomenon. This recognition liberates philosophy from impossible demands. We need not choose between consciousness creating world or world determining consciousness. Both happen together in perception. We need not solve whether humans are fundamentally free or fundamentally determined. We exist as ambiguous beings, exercising situated freedom within facticity. Accepting ambiguity does not mean abandoning rigor, but rather achieving rigor adequate to human existence itself. Yet, this raises a deeper question. If perception is not passive reception, what kind of activity is it? Something extraordinary happens when you look around. Your eyes move, scanning, lingering, returning. Your head turns toward sounds. Your body orients itself to better grasp the situation. This is not passive reception of sensory bombardment. Perception is active engagement, and more specifically, it is questioning. Every glance asks something. When you look at a face, you are asking about mood, intention, recognition. Your eyes search for answers, probing features, returning to aspects that seem significant. When you enter an unfamiliar room, your gaze interrogates the space. Where are the exits? What objects populate it? How does light fall? The body questions through looking, and the world responds through revealing itself. This interrogative structure runs deeper than conscious inquiry. Before you explicitly wonder what something is, your body is already questioning it through exploratory movements. Your hand reaches out, testing weight and texture. Your eyes adjust, focus, seeking clarity. Your entire sensory apparatus operates as ongoing dialogue with things, asking through touching, looking through seeking, understanding through bodily investigation. The world does not impose itself on passive receptors, but answers the body's active queries. Moreover, questioning assumes incompleteness. You interrogate what you do not fully grasp, what partially reveals itself while remaining partially hidden. Perception always involves this play of visible and invisible, present and absent. When you see a cube, 3 faces appear while 3 remain hidden, yet you perceive the whole cube, not just visible surfaces. The invisible faces are somehow co-present in your perception, given as absent, there as not there. This strange structure permeates all experience. Merleau-Ponty died suddenly at age 53 while preparing his major late work. The visible and the invisible remained unfinished, surviving only as working notes and fragmentary chapters. Yet those fragments reveal a deepening ontology, moving beyond phenomenological description toward fundamental questions about being itself. One concept stands at the center of this late thinking, one that had occupied him increasingly: depth. Not depth as measurable distance, but depth as our immersion in being, as the dimension that reveals our carnal insertion in the pattern world. Stand at a window and look outside. Trees recede into distance. Buildings occupy different planes. The horizon stretches far beyond reach. You see all this depth immediately, not through calculation or inference. Yet how? Traditional theories claimed we construct 3-dimensional space from flat retinal images plus memories, judgments, and mental additions. Experience contradicts this entirely. Depth is not something added to perception, but the very way perception happens. You do not see 2-dimensional surfaces, then mentally project them into space. You see depth directly, because you are an embodied being inhabiting space rather than a mind observing it from outside. Your body extends into the world, creating perspective through its situated presence. The near and far are given together in one act of perception, not assembled sequentially from parts. Think about what this means. Simultaneity pervades perceptual experience. When you grasp an object, you feel its surface, while sensing its volume. When you see a face, you perceive the visible features while grasping the person's presence behind those features. Multiple dimensions are co-present, interwoven, given as unified phenomenon rather than constructed from elements. This is possible only because your body occupies space rather than representing it. Furthermore, depth reveals our carnal insertion in being. not consciousness floating above the world, analyzing it from detached viewpoint, but flesh immersed in flesh, bodies situated among bodies. You perceive depth because you have depth, because you are thick presence rather than dimensionless point. Your embodiment makes world perception possible by being itself worldly, material, extended. The perceiving body and perceived world share something fundamental. What do they share? Not just spatial extension, but something more intimate, something Merleau-Ponty struggled to name adequately in his late work. He needed a concept that would unite body and world without reducing either to the other, that would explain how touching and touched, seeing and seen belong together primordially. The answer he developed transformed phenomenology into ontology, moved beyond description of experience toward understanding of being itself. Ancient philosophers spoke of elements: earth, air, fire, water, the fundamental stuffs from which everything is made. Merleau-Ponty proposed a fifth element, one that had been overlooked despite being most intimate to us: flesh. Not biological tissue or animal matter, but the very element of visibility, the stuff that makes perception possible. What is this flesh? Neither matter in the physicist sense, nor consciousness in the idealist sense, but something prior to that distinction. Consider your hand. It is visible, part of the material world, touchable by others. Yet it also sees and touches, participates in consciousness, opens onto world. Your body is simultaneously perceiving and perceived, touching and touched, seeing and seen. It belongs to both sides without being reducible to either. This ambiguous being is flesh. Now, extend this recognition. The things you perceive are not radically different in kind from your perceiving body. They are made of the same flesh, participate in the same element of visibility. When you touch a tree, flesh touches flesh. Your sensitive hand meets sensitive bark. Not mind encountering matter, but flesh, interrogating flesh within one encompassing element. The separation between subject and object, perceiver and perceived, dissolves into their common ground. This is not claiming everything is conscious or that matter thinks. Rather, it recognizes that the opposition between consciousness and matter arises within flesh, emerges from it, but does not constitute its fundamental nature. Before you divide world into mental and physical, subjective and objective, you encounter unified field of visibility, where seer and seen, toucher and touched, already intertwine. This intertwining has specific structure, one that becomes clearest when you attend to how your own body relates to itself. Touch your left hand with your right. Something remarkable happens. As your right hand touches, it feels the texture and temperature of the left. Yet simultaneously, your left hand feels being touched by the right. The roles reverse continuously. Which is subject, which object? Both and neither. They exchange places in a ceaseless alternation that reveals something fundamental about perception itself. Two hands touching expose the deepest structure of perception. Your right hand explores the left, moving across its surface, testing its flexibility. In that moment, the right hand is active sensor, the left passive object, yet the left hand simultaneously feels the right, touching it. Now the left becomes sensor, the right becomes sensed. This is not two separate perceptions, but one event with reversible structure, one chiasm where touching and being touched cross over and intertwine. Merleau-Ponty developed this concept while studying paintings, particularly works by Cézanne. The artist saw what philosophy struggled to articulate. When Cézanne painted, he did not represent external objects as if observing them from outside. Rather, he painted from within the chiasm, from the crossing point where his vision and the landscape intertwined. He saw the mountain seeing him. His body and the visible world exchanged roles, each belonging to the other. Art reveals what analysis obscures. This reversibility structures all perception, not just touch. When you see someone, you see a being capable of seeing you. The visible other is simultaneously seer, and you who see are simultaneously visible. Your eyes that look can be looked at. Your seeing body is part of the visible world it observes. Subject and object do not stand separate but fold into each other, are carved from the same flesh, participate in one crossing structure. Yet, the reversibility never completes. When your right hand touches the left, and you shift attention to feel the left sensing the right, the roles flip but never coincide perfectly. There remains a gap, a divergence, a non-coincidence at the heart of all perception. You cannot be pure subject and pure object simultaneously. The chiasm involves separation as much as intertwining, distance as much as intimacy. This is not failure, but the very structure that makes perception possible. Understanding this prepares us for recognizing how perception operates beyond sensation. Language seems distant from bodily engagement with the world, arbitrary signs conventionally attached to meanings. Yet speech emerges from the same carnal ground as seeing and touching. Words are not external labels applied to pre-existing thoughts, but bodily gestures that carry meaning through their sensuous presence. A child cries, not words yet, not sentences, just sound, erupting from distress. Nevertheless, the cry expresses something, communicates urgency, demands response. Before language becomes a system of arbitrary signs, before grammar and vocabulary, expression emerges from the living body as gesture. Speaking is bodily action, fundamentally continuous with reaching, pointing, dancing. Traditional philosophy treated language as external clothing for pre-existing thoughts. First you think, then you encode thoughts into words, then you transmit those words to others who decode them back into thoughts. This picture makes communication mysterious and precarious. How do words carry meanings across the gap between minds? Merleau-Ponty recognized the picture as backwards from the start. Words themselves are gestures that embody meaning rather than merely designating it. When you say the word crash, the harsh consonants and abrupt ending carry the violence they name. When you whisper, the soft breath embodies gentleness. Poetry knows this intimately. Rhythm, sound, the physical texture of spoken language are not decoration added to neutral content, but the very flesh of meaning. Strip away the sensuous presence, and you lose the meaning, not just its vehicle. Moreover, meaning emerges in the act of speaking, rather than existing beforehand. You often discover what you think through the process of articulating it. The words shape the thought, even as the thought seeks words. Writer's block is not having thoughts, but lacking words. Yet lacking the right words means not yet having fully formed thoughts. Expression and expressed are not separate, but mutually constituting. Language does not represent pre-linguistic experience, but completes and transforms it. This makes language fundamentally ambiguous. It is both personal and impersonal, individual and collective. You speak words inherited from countless others, yet you speak them with unique inflection that makes them yours. Meaning belongs neither purely to the speaker nor purely to the language system, but emerges from their interaction. Each genuine utterance renews language while depending on linguistic tradition, just as each gesture draws on bodily capacities while creating something unprecedented. Nevertheless, this account still treats language as entirely explicit, as if everything expressible becomes fully present in expression. Experience teaches otherwise. Every word carries more than it says, points beyond itself, draws on invisible depths. When someone speaks of home, the word evokes more than any definition captures. Memories, emotions, associations, the entire lived sense of dwelling surge beneath the surface. The spoken word floats on ocean of unsaid meaning. Look at your hand again. You see skin, contours, the play of light across its surface. Yet you also sense the hand's interior, its bones and muscles, its capacity for movement, its belonging to your body. You do not see these directly, yet they are given in perception, not as mere inference or background knowledge, but as invisibly present dimension of what you visibly perceive. Every visible thing has an invisible lining. This is not limitation or failure. We cannot see everything about an object because visibility itself requires hiddenness. When you look at a cube, 3 faces appear while 3 remain concealed. Yet you perceive a complete cube, not 3 isolated surfaces. The hidden faces are co-present, precisely as hidden, given as absent, there in their withdrawal. Remove this structure and perception collapses. Things could not appear at all without simultaneously concealing aspects of themselves. The invisible is not elsewhere, not a separate realm behind or beyond the visible. Rather, the invisible dwells within the visible as its depth, its thickness, its inexhaustible meaningfulness. When you perceive a face, you see features on a surface. Simultaneously, you grasp anger or joy, history and personality, the person animating those features. None of this is visible in the sense surface colors are visible, yet all of it shows itself through the visible, makes the visible what it is. Furthermore, the perceiver belongs to this structure. You see, yet you cannot see yourself seeing. Your vision is invisible to itself, even while making everything else visible. When you try to observe your own looking, you encounter visible eyes in a mirror, not the seeing that looks. The seer is given to itself only through what it sees, never directly. Consciousness is essentially invisible, yet reveals itself through its visible effects, its bodily expressions, its perceptual engagement with world. This interplay of visible and invisible constitutes being itself, not just human perception of being. Things do not first exist completely determinate, then reveal some aspects while hiding others. Rather, being itself involves this play of presence and absence, manifestation and concealment. Every appearance opens onto depths that exceed what appears. Every presence carries traces of absence. Visibility and invisibility intertwine as the fundamental structure of what is. Merleau-Ponty pushed this insight toward new ontology in his unfinished late work. Not idealism, which makes consciousness primary. Not materialism, which reduces everything to matter. Not even phenomenology, which still risks privileging the subjects constituting activity. Something more radical was needed, thinking that would grasp being prior to all traditional categories. Being is neither pure presence nor absence, but their intertwining, neither pure visibility nor invisibility, but their chiasm. Traditional metaphysics divided reality into being and nothingness. What exists versus what does not. Presence versus absence. Fullness versus void. These seem like absolute opposites, mutually exclusive, never overlapping. Yet experience reveals they interpenetrate at every level. Being is shot through with nothingness, and this is not defect, but the very way being happens. Consider again the cube perceived from one angle. The visible faces are present, the hidden faces are absent, yet the absent faces are not simply nothing, they are determinate absences, specific hidden aspects that belong essentially to the visible cube. Their absence is a mode of presence, their invisibility a dimension of visibility. Being includes its own negations, its gaps and lacks, as internal features rather than external opposites. Or consider temporality. The present moment exists, but it exists only by incorporating what no longer is and what is not yet. Retention holds the immediate past that has already vanished. Protension anticipates the near future that has not arrived. The now is thick with absence, constituted by what it is not. Remove past and future, and the present itself disappears. Being requires nothingness to be what it is. Merleau-Ponty called this the fold in being, the point where being bends back on itself, differentiates internally, creates the gap through which visibility becomes possible. Consciousness is not substance separate from world, but this fold, this opening, this internal difference within flesh itself. You are the place where being becomes aware of itself, where flesh questions flesh, where visibility interrogates the visible. Not consciousness creating world, not world determining consciousness, but one phenomenon with two faces. This ontology escapes traditional dilemmas. Realism and idealism both fail because they assume being and consciousness are separate, then argue which is primary. Yet they arise together in the fold, are two aspects of one flesh. Mind-body dualism fails because mind is not substance, but flesh interrogating itself. The subject-object split fails because perceiver and perceived are carved from common element. Metaphysics as the search for ultimate substances or principles fails because being is not substance but event, process, the ongoing intertwining of visible and invisible. What philosophy requires now is not another system, but different thinking entirely. Not analyzing from outside, but participating from within. Not seeking foundations, but dwelling in ambiguity. Not mastering being through concepts, but letting being show itself through engaged perception. Merleau-Ponty died before completing this project, leaving notes and fragments pointing toward ontology he never fully articulated. Yet his fundamental insight endures. We are flesh of the world, becoming aware of itself. Visibility folding back to see its own seeing. Being, questioning its own being. Philosophy must begin and end with this primordial fact. We are not minds observing matter, but embodied openings onto world, carnal interrogations of the visible, living proofs that being and consciousness are not two.